Last for this section, we're going to talk about net income. So a couple of definitions. Receipts are going to be any money that comes in, income. Outlays, the 25-cent word for that is expenses. So it's any money that you pay out. If you want to find your net income, you take your receipts, the money you brought in, and you subtract the outlays. If your net income is positive, that means you have a surplus. Surplus is also known as your profit. A deficit means you have a negative net income. Now, debt is amount of money that you actually owe to lenders. An important distinction here is a deficit does not imply debt. So, playing with the income formula. Suppose your gross income was $40,000, your expenditures were $20,000, $2,000, $6,000, $9,000, and $8,000. Do you have a deficit or do you have a surplus? Well, receipts, our only receipts were the $40,000. Our outlays, we've got to tally them up. So outlays are all of those things that were listed. $20,000 for rent, $2,000 for interest on a credit card, $6,000 on a car, $9,000 on miscellaneous stuff, and $8,000 on taxes. That means our total outlays were $45,000. So you have to have those two numbers before you can actually figure up your net income. Your net income is your receipts minus your outlays. So 40,000 minus 45,000 means my net income is negative 5,000. The fact that my net income is a negative means that I have a deficit. Okay, so we have an income of $28,000. And then we have a list of expenses. So our receipts appear to be $28,000. Our outlays, we need to add up $8,000, $4,500, $1,600, $10,400. If we do that, our outlays $24,500. So if we want to find our net income, it would be receipts minus outlays, and that's going to give us $3,500 left over. That is positive, so we have a surplus. Now, next year you expect to get a 2% raise. That means that your receipts, instead of being $28,000, will be $28,000 plus 2%. So that's $28,000 times 1.02. 28,000 times 1.02, 100% of what you had, plus 2% more, which means your receipts will now be $28,560. But your expenses, or your outlays, will remain the same. Will you be able to pay off $5,200 in credit card debt? Well, if I find my net income here, it'd be $28,560 minus 24,500, my net income will be a positive $4,060. So not quite, but I'll almost be able to pay off that debt. Part C, assume you get your 2% raise. Now that doesn't mean another 2% raise. That means let's keep our raise to $28,560. We want to have our expenses get a 1% increase. So my outlays will increase by 1%. So that's 100% of what they were, plus 1% more is 101%. So times 1.01 means my new expenses will be $24,745. Want to know if I can afford a $3,500 wedding and honeymoon without going into debt. So find my net income would be the $28,560 minus $24,745 means my net income will be $3,905. So yeah, I can afford a $3,500 wedding and honeymoon, and I can even afford to get a bigger ring. That'd be nice. That's what I'd like. Okay, let's look at Brianna. Brianna has a whole list of monthly expenses. And then she has some yearly expenses, and then we have her income. We want to find her net income. So to keep everything somewhat of an order, let's start with her receipts, which would be her income. Now, that is a monthly paycheck of $1,600. Monthly paycheck of $1,600 means she gets 12 of those a year. So 1,600 times 12 would be 19,200. And then she gets a scholarship once a year for $3,000, which means her yearly receipts are $22,200. Now let's talk about her expenses. Oh my goodness, her outlays. We have a whole list of monthly outlays. $700 for insurance, $120 for gas for her car, $140 for health insurance, $75 for auto insurance, $25 for renter's insurance, $110 for her cell phone, $100 for utilities, $300 for groceries, $250 for entertainment. And if we add all those up, that adds up to $1,820 a month. $1,820 a month times 12 is $21,840 a year. Now let's add to that also yearly $12,000 for college, $1,000 on gifts, $1,500 for vacations, $800 on clothes, $600 for charity. Is that it? Add that up, and her total outlays for the year are $37,740. If we want to find her net income, then we have to take the receipts minus the outlays, and that equals negative $15,540. Now, Brianna is operating at a deficit, but that's not the question. The question is Brianna in debt? Well, not necessarily. Operating at a deficit means you are spending more than you are taking in, at least for that year, or whatever that time period is. That is assuming nothing else. It only means you are spending more than you are taking in. Now, how can you spend more than you're taking in and not be in debt? Well, the easiest way is, let's say Brianna had a college fund. If Brianna had a college fund from which she was paying for her college expenses, for example, then she wouldn't need to borrow any money. She just wouldn't be using up her money as quickly as she could. Businesses do this, especially from season to season. Somebody whose business is booming in the summer, and they operate at a deficit during the winter months, but it would even out over the course of a year. In this case, we're just assuming that Brianna has some nest egg that she's using before we would infer that she actually has a debt. Now, this is a different kind of problem, and this is kind of a business scenario. We've got a business that's looked at its income and its outgo over the last year, and they want to change some things. So, overhead, that is what you pay out. Alright, that's your spending. So last year, Busy Bees spent $18,630. Well, if they cut spending in 2015 to only 95% of what they spent in 2014, what would the net income be for Busy Bee in 2015 if the receipts were $18,530? Well, let's keep track of our formula. Net income is equal to receipts minus the outlays. We're wanting to know the net income for Busy Bees in 2015. So, the receipts for 2015 were $18,530. Nowhere do they tell us what the expenses were in 2015, but they say they want 2015 to be 95% of what it was in 2014. 95% of what it was in 2014. Now, I could figure 95% of what the 2014 was separately, but again, it seems like when people pick apart problems, they end up making mistakes that they wouldn't have made if they don't just follow the formula. So if I do 18,530 minus 0.95 times 18,630, I end up with a positive $831.50, which is a surplus. Dancing Dan, we want to do exactly the same thing. So why don't you see if you could pause this and set it up just like I did the last problem. Remember that I want to do receipts minus outlays. We're doing this for 2016, so the receipts for 2016 were $29,980. We want the outlays in 2016 to be 90% of the 2015 value. Let's see what that does to our net income. That still leaves our income at negative $1,700, which means Dancing Dan's is still operating at a deficit. Now want to talk about the federal budget a little bit. The federal budget has two parts, the mandatory outlays and the discretionary outlays. Mandatory outlays are essentially bills that the government has to pay, and they are required to pay them, literally, unless there's an act of Congress to change them. So those kinds of things are Social Security, Medicare, payments to individuals, interest on the federal debt, and they're not allowed to default on their loans. Entitlement just means that there's a law specifically addressing who gets that money. So again, they're just talking about Social Security, Medicare. An entitlement isn't a handout. As we learned in just the last section, you are paying into Social Security and Medicare. It's supposed to be your own account. Discretionary outlays, those are the things that they actually argue about in the budget. Those are the things that are decided on a year-to-year basis. That's why these are the things that they're always fighting about. But there's really only two sections. Defense and non-defense. There's only two parts to the pot. If you raise the money you give to defense, that means you have to decrease the percentage that you give to non-defense. If you increase how much you give to non-defense, like education or housing or the space program, then you have to decrease the amount that goes to military. It's one pot, and however you split it, you have to take away from one to give to the other. Publicly held debt is money the government has to repay to individuals or to institutions that bought treasury bonds. I don't know if you're familiar with treasury bonds, but they're essentially a way to save money. You buy a bond at one value, promise to hold on to it for a certain amount of time, and when you cash it in, you get more money than you paid for it. Gross debt is the total amount of money that the government is obligated to repay, whether that means to everybody else or to itself. The government borrows from itself, like it takes money out of the Social Security Trust Fund and uses it for other things, and that is money that it is supposed to repay, and the problem is they're not, which is why Social Security is going broke. The problems that we actually look at, though, are exactly like we did with Busy Bee and Dancing Dan's. The numbers are just bigger. So if I want to talk about the government debt, finding the net income is the same formula. The net income is receipts minus outlays, and the problems are stated in a similar way. We want to find the net income for 2015. The receipts for 2015 were $79.80 billion. I can just hold the billion in my head until the end. Minus the spending. I want spending to be 85% of 2014. 85% of 2014. Do the math. That turns out to be $738. Remember, that's not $738. That's $738 billion. And since it's positive, that's a surplus. Oops. Surplus doesn't have an E on the end.